Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a medieval city where the streets were darker than the night itself, where the smell of life and death drifted through narrow alleys, and where every step carried the risk of sinking into mud, waste, or something far worse. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these slow journeys into forgotten history. Now dim the lights, find a comfortable place to rest, and let us wander into a city that most travelers wished they could leave behind. The year was 1312. In the kingdom of Avalain, beyond rolling fields and distant forests, stood the crowded city of Blackmere. From far away, Blackmere looked impressive. Stone walls surrounded it. Church towers rose above rooftops. Merchants filled the roads leading toward its gates. Travelers often believed they were approaching a place of opportunity. What they discovered after entering was something entirely different. The city held nearly 12,000 people. For medieval standards, that made it enormous. People arrived every season. Farmers searching for work, craftsmen hopping for fortune, runaway servants escaping harsh lords, pilgrims following religious roads. Every newcomer squeezed into a city already struggling to hold those who lived there. Among the residents was a young cooper named Thomas Alder. At 26 years old, Thomas spent his days crafting wooden barrels near the southern market district. His workshop stood beside a crooked lane called Rat Alley. Nobody knew why it carried that name. Nobody needed an explanation. The rats provided one themselves. Every morning before sunrise, Thomas woke inside a small timber house that he shared with his wife Eleanor and their infant daughter Margaret. The building leaned slightly toward the neighboring structure. Many houses in Blackmere did. Over generations, additions had been built, rebuilt, expanded, and patched together. Some upper floors extended so far above the street that neighbors could almost shake hands through their windows. Little sunlight reached the ground. The lanes remained damp, even during dry weather. When Thomas stepped outside on this particular morning, a cold mist hung between the buildings. The city was quiet. Only distant church bells disturbed the silence. He carried a wooden bucket toward the communal well. Halfway there, he stopped. Someone had emptied a chamber pot from an upper window. The contents splashed onto the muddy road moments before he arrived. Nobody apologized. Nobody looked down. Such incidents happened so frequently that surprise had long vanished from city life. Thomas simply sighed and continued walking. Near the well, several women already waited. They discussed a baker whose son had fallen ill. Others complained about rising bread prices. One elderly woman argued that the city smelled worse every year. Nobody disagreed. The well itself sat beside a shallow drainage ditch. Water flowed slowly through it. Sometimes, more often, it barely moved at all. The ditch collected runoff from surrounding streets. Rainwater mixed with mud. Mud mixed with waste. waste mixed with almost everything imaginable. When heavy storms arrived, the entire area transformed into a foul swamp. Thomas filled his bucket and returned home. The smell barely registered anymore. Most residents experienced the city through layers of familiarity. What would horrify an outsider had become normal. After breakfast of dark bread and weak ale, Thomas headed toward his workshop. The market district was waking. Fishmongers arranged their catches. Butchers prepared hooks. Peddlers opened stalls. Dogs searched for scraps. Pigs wandered freely. The pigs performed an important service. They consumed garbage. City authorities tolerated them because nobody possessed a better solution. Occasionally, the animals chased children. Occasionally, they knocked over baskets. Occasionally, they disappeared into alleys, carrying something they should not have been eating. Life continued regardless. Near the marketplace stood a large pile of refuse. Officially, it was temporary. Unofficially, it had existed for years. Broken pottery, rotting vegetables, animal remains, ashes, straw, countless unidentifiable objects. The heap attracted birds from miles away. Black clouds of crows often circled above it. Some people believed the birds were becoming larger. Others insisted that was nonsense. Still, nobody enjoyed standing beneath them. Thomas reached his workshop shortly after sunrise. His apprentice, 14-year-old Peter, arrived moments later. Together, they began repairing barrels ordered by a local brewer. The work was repetitive, steady, predictable. Thomas preferred it that way. The city contained enough uncertainty already. By midday, the streets had transformed completely. Merchants shouted, customers bargained, animals squealed, church bells marked the hours, carts rattled across uneven roads. Every sound echoed between closely packed buildings. Noise became another permanent resident of Blackmere. During the afternoon, a city official appeared near the market square. He carried a wooden staff marked with the crest of Lord Geoffrey of Avalain. People immediately paid attention. Officials rarely brought pleasant news. The man announced that complaints about street conditions had reached the Lord's representatives. Several merchants had reported customers avoiding certain roads due to unbearable smells. A committee would inspect sanitation conditions. The announcement produced laughter, not joyful laughter, the kind born from disbelief. An old merchant loudly asked whether the committee planned to inspect with their eyes closed. Several people chuckled. The official ignored them. Thomas returned to work, yet the announcement remained in his thoughts. Everyone complained about the filth. Everyone acknowledged the problem. Nothing changed. The city continued growing. Waste continued accumulating. The narrow streets continued trapping odors. Even rain provided only temporary relief. As evening approached, clouds gathered overhead. Dark shapes drifted across the sky. Shopkeepers hurried to protect goods. from incoming weather. The first drops began falling shortly before sunset. Within minutes, the roads transformed. Mud thickened, ditches overflowed, water carried debris through the streets. Children watched floating scraps pass beneath bridges. Some laughed, adults worried. Heavy rain often revealed the city's weaknesses, and Blackmere possessed many. Thomas closed the workshop and started home. Progress was slow. The road resembled a river more than a street. Several people slipped while attempting to cross particularly deep sections. One cart became stuck entirely. Its wheels vanished into muck. A dozen men struggled to free it. By the time Thomas reached Rat Alley, darkness had settled across the city. Lanterns glowed behind shutters. Rain hammered rooftops. Water dripped from every surface. Inside his home, Alina prepared cabbage stew over a small fire. Margaret slept peacefully despite the storm. Thomas sat beside the flames. For a while, he listened to the rain. The sound seemed endless, almost soothing. Then another noise emerged. A crash, somewhere outside, followed by shouting. Then more shouting. Thomas exchanged a glance with Alina. Storms often caused trouble. Collapsing walls, flooded cellars, falling roofs. He moved toward the door and listened. Voices echoed through the darkness. Running footsteps splashed through puddles. Something unusual was happening. And somewhere beyond Rat Alley, hidden by rain and night, the city of Blackmere was about to discover that its filth was not merely unpleasant. It was becoming dangerous. Thomas did not yet know it. No one did. But before morning arrived, the first signs of a disaster years in the making would emerge from beneath the mud-covered streets, and the people of Blackmere would begin learning just how fragile their crowded world truly was. The rain continued long after most of Blackmere had fallen asleep. Water poured from rooftops in silver sheets. Gutters overflowed. Narrow passageways became streams. The city had endured storms before, but this one seemed determined to test every weakness hidden beneath its crowded streets. Thomas listened from his bed while wind rattled the shutters. At some point during the night, he drifted into uneasy sleep. When dawn finally arrived, the rain had weakened, yet the city remained drenched. A gray mist covered the rooftops. Church bells rang faintly through the damp morning air. Thomas rose before sunrise and stepped outside. Immediately, he sensed that something was wrong. People were gathering farther down Rat Alley. Not walking, not working, gathering. Whenever city residents abandoned their routines, trouble usually followed. He joined the crowd. The smell reached him first, a foul odor even stronger than the usual scents of Blackmere. Men and women covered their noses. Children stared wide-eyed from behind their parents. Thomas pushed forward until he reached the front. There, near a section of roadway that had partially collapsed during the storm, a large hole had opened in the ground. The cavity stretched nearly 20 feet across. Broken planks and chunks of earth surrounded its edges. Dark water pooled at the bottom, but that was not what held everyone's attention. The storm had uncovered something buried beneath the street, a forgotten drainage tunnel. The ancient structure ran beneath several blocks of the city. Stone walls lined its sides. Rotting timbers supported portions of the ceiling. The tunnel looked centuries old. No one seemed certain who had built it. Some claimed it dated back to the city's earliest foundations. Others insisted it was older than Blackmere itself. The discovery might have been exciting under different circumstances. Instead, the exposed passage revealed years of accumulated waste. Layers upon layers of refuse filled much of the tunnel. Rotting matter, animal carcasses, broken tools, discarded food, mud, filth. The smell was overwhelming. An elderly mason standing nearby shook his head. "That has been sitting there for generations," he muttered. Nobody argued. Soon city officials arrived. They inspected the collapse, while scribes recorded observations on wax tablets. Workers erected temporary barriers around the opening. People watched with fascination. Others simply wanted to know whether their homes were safe. No one received clear answers. By midday, rumors had already spread throughout Blackmere. Some said the tunnel stretched beneath half the city. Some claimed hidden chambers connected to it. Others insisted treasure might be buried somewhere below. Human beings had always enjoyed stories. Even unpleasant discoveries quickly gathered legends around them. Thomas spent much of the morning working, yet conversations constantly returned to the collapse. Customers discussed it. Merchants debated it. Priests mentioned it. By afternoon, nearly everyone seemed to have their own theory. Then another problem emerged. A fish seller in the Eastern District reported dozens of dead rats floating in a drainage ditch. Ordinarily, this would have attracted little attention. Blackmere contained more rats than anyone could count. Dead ones appeared regularly. This time was different. There were hundreds, perhaps more. People found them near canals, along alleyways, beside wells, in cellars. The storm appeared to have driven them from underground hiding places. Children collected tales for small rewards offered by local authorities. Within hours, piles of dead rodents appeared across the city. Many residents welcomed the sight. Fewer rats seemed like good news. Others felt uneasy. Animals often noticed danger before people did. As evening approached, Father Benedict of St. Aldwyn's Church delivered a short sermon addressing growing concerns. He encouraged calm. Storm damage was unfortunate but manageable. The city had survived hardships before. It would survive this one as well. His words reassured some listeners. Not everyone. The following morning brought fresh worries. 3 workers assigned to inspect the exposed tunnel failed to report for duty. Their supervisor eventually found them. All three were suffering from severe fevers. They complained of headaches and exhaustion. One could barely stand. Another drifted in and out of consciousness. At first, few people connected the illnesses to the drainage collapse. Fevers were common. Life in medieval cities provided endless opportunities for sickness. Yet by evening, 2 additional laborers developed similar symptoms. Then a cart driver, then a butcher's assistant, then an elderly woman living near the damaged roadway. The pattern slowly began attracting attention. Thomas first heard about it while purchasing wood near the market square. A carpenter mentioned the sick workers. A customer added another story. Within minutes, several people exchanged rumors. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. The uncertainty itself became frightening. Days passed. The weather improved. Sunlight returned. Roads gradually dried. Unfortunately, the illnesses did not disappear. More residents fell sick. Some recovered after several days. Others worsened rapidly. Doctors offered conflicting explanations. Bad air, contaminated water, seasonal imbalance, divine punishment. Each theory found supporters. Each theory found critics. Blackmere possessed plenty of opinions. Reliable knowledge was harder to locate. Thomas attempted to focus on work. Barrels still required repair. Customers still expected deliveries. Life had to continue. Yet he could not ignore what he observed around him. Market attendance declined. Travelers hurried through the city instead of lingering. Conversations became quieter. People exchanged worried glances. Fear moved through Blackmere like an invisible fog. One afternoon, Peter, Thomas's young apprentice, arrived late. The boy looked pale. Thomas immediately noticed. "Are you ill?" he asked. Peter shook his head. "My mother is." The answer carried enough weight. Thomas said nothing for several moments. Everyone knew families touched by sickness. Increasingly, those families lived nearby. Peter worked slowly throughout the day. His thoughts clearly remained elsewhere. When evening came, Thomas allowed him to leave early. The apprentice practically ran home. 3 days later, Peter did not arrive at all, nor the next day. Thomas visited the family's home after sunset. The small dwelling stood near the northern wall. A neighbor met him outside. The expression on the woman's face revealed everything before she spoke. Peter's mother had died. Peter himself was ill. The boy remained inside, too weak to leave bed. Thomas returned home troubled. Blackmere had always contained hardship. People died regularly, yet something about the growing number of cases felt different. Larger, more connected. The city authorities eventually responded. Inspectors examined wells. Workers removed animal carcasses. Street cleaners received additional assignments. Public announcements urged residents to dispose of waste properly. The efforts sounded impressive. Reality proved less effective. Cleaning a medieval city was difficult on the best of days. Cleaning one already struggling with disease bordered on impossible. Weeks of neglect could not be erased overnight. Generations of poor sanitation certainly could not. The exposed drainage tunnel remained partially open while engineers debated repairs. Its foul contents continued attracting attention. Some officials wanted the entire area sealed immediately. Others argued that further investigation was necessary. Meetings followed meetings. Discussions followed discussions. Meanwhile, people continued getting sick. One morning, Thomas noticed unusual activity near St. Aldwyn's Cemetery. Gravediggers were expanding burial space. Fresh earth formed long rows beside existing graves. The sight unsettled everyone who passed. Nobody needed an explanation. Preparation itself sent a message. The city expected more deaths. By midsummer, the atmosphere of Blackmere had changed completely. Markets remained open. Workshops continued operating. Church services still took place. Yet beneath the appearance of normal life, anxiety spread everywhere. Travelers arriving at the gates often heard warnings before entering. Some chose to leave immediately. Merchants began shortening visits. Several wealthy families temporarily relocated to country estates outside the walls. Those without such options stayed where they were. Most residents had nowhere else to go. Thomas certainly did not. One evening, he sat outside his home, watching the setting sun reflect across wet rooftops. For a brief moment, Blackmere appeared beautiful. Golden light touched church towers. Birds crossed the sky. The city seemed peaceful. Then a funeral procession passed along the street. Mourners walked silently behind a simple wooden cart. A bell rang somewhere in the distance. The illusion vanished. Thomas lowered his eyes. The funeral disappeared around a corner. Another followed less than an hour later. The days were growing longer. The burial lines were growing longer too. And deep beneath the streets, hidden beyond sight, the forgotten tunnels of Blackmere still held secrets that nobody had fully uncovered. Secrets that had slept for centuries. Secrets that would soon transform a troubling sickness into a catastrophe remembered for generations. The worst chapter of Blackmere's story had not yet begun. The worst chapter of Blackmere's story had not yet begun. Summer settled over the kingdom of Avalain with long days and warm evenings. Beyond the city walls, fields of barley swayed beneath gentle breezes. Farmers worked beneath clear skies. Birds filled the countryside with song. Inside Blackmere, however, the season felt strangely different. Heat had arrived, and heat made everything worse. The narrow lanes that trapped rainwater now trapped odors. Refuse piles baked beneath the sun. Stagnant ditches thickened into foul channels. Flies multiplied in enormous numbers. They covered market stalls. They gathered around butcher tables. They drifted through open windows. No amount of swatting seemed capable of reducing them. Thomas noticed the change immediately. Each morning, the air felt heavier than the day before. The smell of the city lingered constantly. Even during meals, he could not entirely escape it. Many residents had become accustomed to unpleasant scents over the years. Yet now conversations increasingly returned to the same complaint. The city seemed to be rotting, not metaphorically, literally. Meanwhile, the sickness continued spreading. Doctors disagreed about its cause. Priests prayed for relief. Officials issued announcements. None of it slowed the growing number of victims. Peter's condition worsened. Thomas visited whenever work allowed. The apprentice lay upon a straw mattress in a dark room, sweating despite the heat. Some days, he seemed slightly improved. Other days, he barely recognized visitors. His father looked exhausted. Weeks of worry had aged the man considerably. Thomas brought bread whenever possible, sometimes broth, occasionally a few coins. It never felt like enough. One afternoon, while returning from Peter's home, Thomas passed through Weaver's Square. Normally, the marketplace bustled with activity. Today, many stalls stood empty. Several merchants had left the city. Others remained indoors. Customers moved quickly between shops and returned home as soon as purchases were complete. People no longer gathered simply to talk. Every stranger represented uncertainty. Every cough attracted attention. Every rumor spread with alarming speed. Near the center of the square, a city crier stood atop a wooden platform. A crowd had formed around him. Thomas joined the listeners. The crier announced that 2 additional street collapses had occurred in districts west of the river canal. Fortunately, nobody had been killed. Unfortunately, both incidents revealed more ancient drainage passages beneath the city. Engineers believed a network of forgotten tunnels extended under much of Blackmere. The news produced nervous murmurs. People had always assumed the ground beneath their feet was solid. Now many wondered what else might be hidden below. That evening, Thomas discussed the announcement with Alina. She stirred a pot of cabbage soup, while Margaret played quietly beside the hearth. "Do you think the city is sinking?" Alina asked. Thomas shrugged. "I don't know. Neither did anyone else. Blackmere had existed for centuries. Generations had built upon earlier generations. Structures rose where older buildings once stood. Roads shifted. Foundations changed. Few records survived from the city's earliest years. Large portions of its history remained buried beneath layers of construction. The forgotten tunnels seemed to belong to that hidden past, and increasingly, people blamed them for the city's troubles. Several days later, a group of laborers entered one of the newly discovered passages. Officials wanted measurements, maps, information. The men carried lanterns and ropes. They expected a routine inspection. Only 4 of the 6 returned. The survivors emerged pale and shaken. According to their account, part of the tunnel had collapsed while they were exploring deeper sections. 2 workers vanished beneath falling debris. Attempts to rescue them failed. The unstable structure threatened to bury everyone. Reluctantly, the remaining men retreated. News of the tragedy spread quickly. Families gathered near the collapse site. Wives cried. Children waited. The city authorities promised recovery efforts. Yet everyone understood the truth. The missing laborers would never come home. The tunnels had claimed their first victims. Unfortunately, they would not be the last. By late summer, another troubling development appeared. Rats, at first their numbers, had seemed reduced. Dead rodents had been found everywhere after the storm. Many residents celebrated. Now the situation reversed. Suddenly, rats appeared in astonishing quantities. Entire groups crossed streets in broad daylight. Shopkeepers discovered nests beneath floors. Warehouse owners reported grain losses. Some claimed the animals were emerging from underground passages, disturbed by the collapses. Whether true or not, the explanation sounded plausible. Thomas witnessed one particularly unsettling sight while delivering barrels near the docks. A section of damaged pavement had partially sunk. From the opening poured dozens of rats, perhaps hundreds. They scattered in every direction. Pedestrians screamed. Children climbed onto carts. Even grown men stepped backward. The animals vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. Yet the image remained fixed in Thomas's memory. Something about it felt unnatural, as though the city itself had been disturbed, as though hidden things were being forced upward. The sickness continued its relentless advance. St. Aldwyn's Cemetery expanded again, then expanded once more. Funeral processions became part of daily life. Bell towers rang so frequently that many residents stopped counting. Thomas learned to recognize morning bells without even thinking about it. Their sound drifted across Blackmere from dawn until dusk. Sometimes later, one evening, while returning from the workshop, Thomas encountered Father Benedict walking alone through Rat Alley. The priest appeared tired. His shoulders slumped beneath the weight of countless responsibilities. Thomas greeted him respectfully. Father Benedict returned the greeting. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the priest sighed. "I buried 12 people today." Thomas struggled to find words. 12 in a single day. The number felt impossible. Yet Father Benedict's expression suggested it was true. "The city has seen difficult years before," Thomas finally said. The priest nodded slowly. "Yes." He looked toward the darkening sky. "But I fear this year intends to become something else." Those words lingered in Thomas's thoughts long after the conversation ended. Something else. The phrase seemed strangely accurate. Blackmere no longer felt like the city he had known. The familiar streets remained. The same buildings stood. The same bells rang. Yet beneath the surface, everything was changing. Autumn arrived. Leaves turned golden beyond the city walls. Harvest wagons rolled toward markets. Cooler air offered brief relief from summer's heat. Many residents hoped the sickness would finally weaken. Instead, it adapted. New cases continued appearing. Some districts suffered more heavily than others. Certain neighborhoods seemed cursed. Entire households fell ill within days. Doors remained closed. Windows stayed shuttered. People whispered as they passed. Several streets gained reputations for misfortune. Travelers avoided them. Locals crossed themselves when mentioning them. One morning, Thomas discovered that a neighboring cooper had died during the night. The man had worked only 3 buildings away. They had shared conversations for years. Now his workshop stood silent. Tools remained exactly where he had left them. Half-finished barrels sat abandoned. The sight unsettled Thomas more deeply than he expected. Death was becoming familiar. Too familiar. Weeks later, another craftsman disappeared from daily life. Then another. The city seemed to be losing pieces of itself. Small pieces at first, yet enough pieces removed from anything eventually changed its shape. As October approached, a council of officials, merchants, priests, and guild leaders gathered inside the town hall. Residents waited anxiously for news. The meeting lasted nearly an entire day. By evening, an announcement finally emerged. Large sections of Blackmere's underground drainage system would be sealed. Inspection teams reported dangerous conditions, collapsed passages, flooded chambers, accumulated waste beyond imagination. The council hoped closure would reduce risks, perhaps improve public health, perhaps restore confidence, perhaps accomplish something. No one could guarantee success. Still, action seemed preferable to endless discussion. Workers began preparations immediately. Stone masons collected materials. Laborers assembled equipment. Supervisors organized crews. For the first time in months, residents witnessed authorities moving decisively. Hope flickered, only slightly, but it existed. Thomas watched the activity with cautious optimism. Maybe repairs would help. Maybe conditions would improve. Maybe the city could recover. He wanted to believe it. Many people did. Yet beneath Blackmere, in chambers untouched by sunlight for centuries, workers were preparing to uncover areas nobody had entered in living memory. Places older than the city itself. Places sealed long before Thomas was born. Long before his parents were born. Long before anyone remembered why they had been closed. And within those forgotten depths waited a discovery that would change everything. A discovery that would turn whispers into fear and fear into outright panic. Because the men sent below were about to find something far more troubling than mud, rats, or collapsed stone. They were about to find evidence that someone, centuries earlier, had desperately tried to keep those tunnels hidden forever. They were about to find evidence that someone, centuries earlier, had desperately tried to keep those tunnels hidden forever. The work began on a cold morning beneath low gray clouds. Teams of laborers gathered near the largest tunnel entrance, exposed by the summer collapses. Stone masons arrived with carts full of limestone blocks. Supervisors carried lists and diagrams. Guards stood nearby to prevent curious citizens from wandering into dangerous areas. Half of Blackmere seemed determined to watch. People crowded around barriers. Merchants paused business. Children climbed crates for a better view. Rumors had transformed the tunnel project into the most discussed subject in the city. Some believed forgotten treasure would be discovered. Others expected ancient burial chambers. A few whispered about monsters. Human imagination rarely tolerated uncertainty for long. Thomas joined the spectators before beginning work at his shop. He watched workers disappear underground carrying lanterns. One by one, their lights vanished into darkness. The crowd slowly dispersed. Life resumed, at least on the surface. Below ground, however, events were unfolding that would soon dominate every conversation in Blackmere. The first days passed without incident. Surveyors mapped passages. Laborers removed debris. Engineers assessed structural damage. Reports described extensive networks stretching beneath districts that no longer resembled their medieval layouts. Some tunnels connected unexpectedly. Others ended abruptly. Several appeared older than any known city records. The discoveries fascinated scholars and priests alike. Yet one section drew particular attention. Deep beneath the western quarter, workers uncovered a stone wall, unlike anything else underground. It blocked an entire passage. The structure looked deliberate, purposeful. Whoever built it had not intended to support the tunnel. They had intended to seal it. Massive stones fitted tightly together. Iron braces reinforced the exterior. Mortar filled every gap. The wall appeared designed to prevent passage rather than encourage it. When supervisors received news of the find, they immediately ordered further investigation. The wall should not have existed. Nothing in surviving city records mentioned it. No maps indicated a sealed chamber. No documents explained its purpose. Naturally, that only increased curiosity. 3 days later, workers began dismantling the barrier. Progress proved slow. The construction was remarkably strong. Several laborers commented that the builders must have expected extraordinary pressure from the opposite side. The remark earned nervous laughter. Nobody genuinely believed anything waited behind the wall. At least nobody admitted it. By the afternoon of the 4th day, enough stones had been removed to create a narrow opening. A draft of stale air emerged. The smell differed from the rest of the tunnels. Older, drier, strangely preserved. Lantern bearers widened the gap and entered. Their absence lasted nearly an hour. When they returned, their expressions immediately attracted attention. Something unusual had been found. Word reached the surface within minutes. A chamber, an enormous one, far larger than expected. Authorities ordered the area secured. Additional surveyors descended. Several priests accompanied them. That decision alone intensified speculation throughout Blackmere. Priests rarely inspected drainage systems. By evening, the entire city buzzed with rumors. Thomas heard at least 10 different versions before returning home. One claimed ancient kings were buried below. Another described a hidden chapel. A third insisted workers had discovered evidence of demons. The story grew more dramatic with every retelling. The truth proved less fantastic, yet perhaps more unsettling. The following day, officials released a brief statement. Behind the wall lay an abandoned storage complex dating back several centuries. The chambers contained old tools, broken carts, pottery fragments, and records damaged beyond recognition. Nothing dangerous had been found. Citizens should remain calm. The announcement failed completely. People interpreted it as proof that authorities were hiding something. Whenever officials insisted, there was no reason for concern. Residents usually assumed the opposite. Thomas suspected the same, not because he enjoyed rumors, because the statement felt incomplete. Something had prompted the presence of priests. Something had justified sealing an entire tunnel, and something had convinced long-dead builders to create a barrier strong enough to survive centuries. Questions multiplied. Answers remained scarce. Several nights later, Thomas received unexpected information. His customer, a stonemason named Walter Finch, arrived at the workshop carrying a damaged barrel. Walter had spent days working near the excavation site. Normally, he enjoyed conversation. Today, he seemed distracted, nervous. Thomas eventually asked what troubled him. Walter hesitated. Then he glanced toward the doorway to ensure nobody stood nearby. "I wasn't supposed to hear this," he whispered. Thomas waited. The chamber wasn't empty. The words immediately captured his attention. Walter lowered his voice further. "There were bones." Thomas frowned. "Human bones." Walter nodded. "Many." Silence settled between them. That possibility had not occurred to Thomas. A few skeletons might have been understandable. A burial site, an accident, a forgotten crypt. Walter's expression suggested something larger. "How many?" Thomas asked. The mason swallowed. "More than anyone expected." The answer provided little detail, yet it was enough. By sunset, new rumors spread through Blackmere. Bones, skeletons, mass graves, secret burials. Nobody knew the facts. Everyone discussed them anyway. During the following week, bits of information continued leaking from workers involved in the excavation. Each fragment painted a darker picture. The sealed chamber contained remains belonging to dozens of people, possibly more. The bodies appeared centuries old. Many had been arranged hurriedly. Several showed signs of illness before death. Others seemed buried together without ceremony. The discoveries alarmed city leaders, not because ancient skeletons were inherently dangerous, because they raised disturbing questions. Why had so many people died in one location? Why had the area been sealed? And why had later generations apparently erased knowledge of the site? Scholars searched archives. Priests examined forgotten manuscripts. City scribes compared surviving records. The investigation produced little. Blackmere's early history remained frustratingly incomplete. Wars, fires, floods, time itself, all had destroyed valuable documents. Large portions of the past survived only through legends. One such legend suddenly returned to public attention. An elderly monk from St. Aldwyn's Monastery mentioned a story preserved in a damaged manuscript. According to the account, centuries earlier, an unnamed sickness had swept through a settlement that existed before modern Blackmere. Many died. The dead were supposedly buried underground. Entire sections of the settlement were sealed. Survivors abandoned certain areas forever. Most historians dismissed the tale as folklore. Now people reconsidered. The timing seemed too convenient. The details too similar. Fear thrives when uncertainty meets coincidence. Soon residents began comparing the ancient sickness to the one currently affecting the city. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Both involved crowded districts. Both followed periods of poor sanitation. Both produced waves of illness. Whether the connection was real hardly mattered. People believed it might be. That alone changed behavior. Attendance at markets declined further. Travelers increasingly avoided Blackmere altogether. Several merchants relocated operations elsewhere. Economic activity slowed noticeably. The city was becoming isolated. Meanwhile, the sickness continued claiming victims. Father Benedict now spent more time conducting funerals than sermons. Gravediggers worked from dawn until darkness. New burial grounds opened beyond the walls. Bell towers rang constantly. The sound became part of daily life. Morning bells, afternoon bells, evening bells. Sometimes Thomas imagined he could hear them in his sleep. One particularly cold evening, while walking home through mist-covered streets, he noticed something unusual. A group of citizens stood outside the town hall, arguing with guards. Their voices carried through the fog. Thomas approached cautiously. The crowd demanded answers. They wanted access to excavation reports. They wanted information about the skeletons. Most of all, they wanted reassurance. The guards offered none. The confrontation eventually dispersed without violence. Yet the mood lingered. People no longer trusted official statements. They suspected deeper problems, hidden dangers, forgotten mistakes from the past, and perhaps, for the first time since the troubles began, Thomas found himself sharing that suspicion. Because if the ancient chamber truly contained evidence of a previous catastrophe, then Blackmere might not simply be experiencing bad luck. It might be repeating history. The thought followed him home. It remained with him through supper. It lingered beside the fire after Alina and Margaret had fallen asleep. Outside, autumn winds rattled shutters and swept through narrow streets. Far below those streets, workers continued exploring chambers untouched for centuries. And within one recently uncovered room, hidden beneath piles of debris and dust, surveyors had just discovered a collection of preserved records. Records written by people who had lived through the disaster that came before. Records that might finally reveal why an entire section of the underground city had been sealed away. Records that would soon expose a terrifying truth. The people of ancient Blackmere had not hidden those tunnels to protect themselves from the dead. They had hidden them to protect themselves from the living. The people of ancient Blackmere had not hidden those tunnels to protect themselves from the dead. They had hidden them to protect themselves from the living. The discovery of the preserved records remained secret for only 2 days. In a city as crowded as Blackmere, secrets rarely survived much longer. A scribe spoke to a laborer. The laborer spoke to a cousin. The cousin shared the story in a tavern. By the following morning, half the city knew that ancient documents had been recovered from beneath the streets. Naturally, nobody knew exactly what those documents contained. That did not prevent endless speculation. Some claimed they described a forgotten war. Others insisted they revealed evidence of heresy. A few dramatic storytellers announced that the records proved Blackmere had once been cursed. As always, rumor traveled faster than truth. The actual documents proved difficult to read. Centuries of age had damaged many pages. Ink had faded. Water stains obscured sections of text. Several passages were missing entirely, yet enough survived for scholars to begin assembling a picture of the past. The records appeared to come from a municipal archive dating back roughly 300 years. At that time, Blackmere had been smaller, much smaller. The stone walls enclosed only a fraction of the territory occupied by the modern city. Entire districts that now housed thousands of residents had not yet existed. The settlement had been growing rapidly. Newcomers arrived constantly. Roads expanded. Buildings multiplied. Merchants prospered. The descriptions sounded surprisingly familiar. In many ways, ancient Blackmere resembled the city Thomas knew. Unfortunately, the similarities did not end there. One afternoon, Father Benedict received permission to examine copies of several translated passages. That evening, he visited Thomas's workshop. The priest often stopped by to inspect barrel orders for church storage. So his arrival attracted little attention. Yet today, he carried a different expression, a troubled one, after ensuring nobody else was nearby. He quietly shared what he had learned. According to the recovered records, the ancient settlement had suffered from severe sanitation problems. Waste accumulated in streets. Drainage systems failed. Water sources became contaminated. Residents complained repeatedly. Authorities delayed major repairs due to cost. Thomas listened carefully. Every sentence sounded familiar. Too familiar. The priest continued. As conditions worsened, illness began spreading through crowded neighborhoods. At first, only a handful of cases appeared. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Panic followed. The records described overwhelmed burial grounds, abandoned homes, fearful citizens avoiding neighbors. The similarities grew increasingly uncomfortable. That cannot be a coincidence, Thomas said quietly. Father Benedict did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared through the workshop doorway toward the busy street beyond. Finally, he sighed. I pray that it is. Neither man sounded convinced. The information spread gradually through the city. Officials attempted to control the narrative. They emphasized that historical events did not necessarily predict modern outcomes. The argument was reasonable. Unfortunately, reason had become difficult to hear beneath growing anxiety. People focused on the parallels, the ancient outbreak, the modern sickness, the underground chambers, the forgotten graves. Every new detail strengthened the connection. Meanwhile, autumn deepened. Cold winds arrived from the north. Rain returned. The streets once again transformed into muddy channels. Blackmere seemed trapped between seasons. Not quite autumn, not quite winter. The city felt suspended in a gray, uncomfortable limbo. And within that uncertainty, fear continued spreading. One morning, Thomas opened his workshop and found a crowd gathered near the market square. Voices echoed between buildings. Several guards attempted to maintain order. Curiosity drew him closer. At the center of the gathering stood a merchant named Gilbert Rowe. Most residents knew him. He operated one of the larger grain warehouses near the docks. Normally, Gilbert enjoyed a reputation for calm professionalism. Today, he appeared furious. According to witnesses, city officials had ordered temporary inspections of warehouse facilities. Concerns about contamination had prompted additional regulations. Gilbert argued that the measures interfered with trade. Others accused him of prioritizing profit over public safety. The argument quickly escalated. Soon, dozens of people were shouting. The dispute revealed a growing divide within Blackmere. Some residents demanded stronger action against the sickness. Others feared economic collapse more than disease. Both sides believed they were protecting the city. Neither trusted the other. Such tensions multiplied across Blackmere, Shopkeepers worried about declining business. Workers feared losing employment. Families feared illness. Officials feared panic. The city remained functional, yet cracks were beginning to show, not in the stone walls, in the people themselves. A week later, another discovery emerged from the underground archive. This one proved far more alarming. Among the recovered records was a partially preserved journal written by an anonymous city official during the ancient outbreak. The surviving passages described events in vivid detail. The official recorded growing sickness, increasing deaths, mounting fear. Yet one section attracted particular attention. It mentioned violence, at first isolated incidents, then organized groups, citizens blaming one another, merchants accused of poisoning wells, foreign travelers accused of spreading disease, entire families attacked based on rumors. The official described a city slowly turning against itself. Thomas heard portions of the journal read aloud during a public discussion near St. Aldwyn's Church. The listeners stood in silence. Nobody enjoyed the comparison because signs of similar tensions already existed. Arguments occurred more frequently. Distrust increased. Neighbors watched one another suspiciously. The atmosphere felt increasingly fragile. The ancient journal seemed less like history and more like a warning. As October faded into November, temperatures dropped further. Cold mornings covered rooftops with frost. Smoke rose from thousands of chimneys. Residents spent more time indoors. Crowded indoor spaces brought fresh concerns. The sickness continued circulating, not as rapidly as before, but steadily, relentlessly, enough to prevent hope from taking root. One evening, Thomas visited Peter. The apprentice had survived the worst of his illness. Recovery came slowly. The boy remained thin and weak, yet he could sit upright now. He could speak comfortably. He could even smile. For the first time in months, Thomas felt genuine relief. Not every story ended in tragedy. Not every patient died. Some recovered. Some endured. The reminder felt important. Blackmere needed reasons to hope. Unfortunately, good news rarely remained alone for long. 3 days later, an accident occurred near one of the excavation sites. Workers exploring deeper sections of the underground complex discovered another sealed passage. Unlike the previous barrier, this one appeared damaged. Cracks spread across its surface. Several stones had shifted. Investigators believed the structure had weakened over centuries. A small team entered to assess conditions beyond. Only moments later, part of the ceiling collapsed. 2 men suffered serious injuries. One died before reaching the surface. The incident shocked authorities, not because tunnel collapses were unexpected, because the newly exposed chamber contained additional records that had apparently been hidden separately from the others. Whatever lay beyond the damaged wall had been considered important enough to seal twice. That detail immediately attracted attention. Scholars examined the recovered materials with urgency. Several nights passed. Then whispers began circulating among officials. Disturbing whispers. The new documents appeared to describe the final phase of the ancient disaster, the phase that earlier records barely mentioned, the phase that eventually led to the sealing of entire underground districts. For reasons nobody yet understood, authorities delayed releasing details. That decision only intensified public curiosity. Every tavern conversation returned to the same subject. What had the documents revealed? What were officials hiding? Why did scholars seem so troubled? Questions multiplied. Answers remained scarce. Thomas noticed another change as well. The bell towers rang less frequently, not because fewer people were dying, because residents had become accustomed to the sound. Funeral bells no longer shocked anyone. That realization unsettled him more than the bells themselves. Human beings could adapt to almost anything, even tragedy, especially tragedy. One cold evening, he stood outside his home watching fog drift through Rat Alley. Lantern light glowed faintly in the mist. Somewhere a dog barked. A cart rolled across distant cobblestones. The city seemed strangely quiet. Then a rider emerged from the darkness. The horse moved quickly, too quickly. The rider wore the colors of the town council. He galloped toward the administrative quarter without slowing. Several residents stepped aside to let him pass. Thomas watched until both horse and rider disappeared. Something about the urgency felt wrong. The next morning, the reason became clear. During the night, scholars studying the newly recovered records had reached a conclusion so disturbing that emergency meetings began before sunrise, because the final documents revealed how the ancient outbreak had truly ended. It had not faded naturally. It had not been cured. It had not simply disappeared. Instead, according to the records, the sickness had triggered something far worse, something that transformed fear into chaos, something that nearly destroyed the city from within. And if the scholars were correct, Blackmere was beginning to show the exact same warning signs. And if the scholars were correct, Blackmere was beginning to show the exact same warning signs. The emergency meetings lasted 3 days. Council members entered the town hall before sunrise and often remained until long after darkness covered the city. Messengers hurried through the streets carrying sealed documents. Guards stood outside important buildings. Priests were summoned. Guild leaders were consulted. The unusual activity did not go unnoticed. Nothing ever went unnoticed in Blackmere. Citizens gathered in taverns and marketplaces, discussing possibilities. Some expected new health regulations. Others predicted quarantines. Many feared something worse. By the 4th day, the council finally addressed the public. A platform was erected in Weaver Square, several hundred residents gathered despite cold winds sweeping through the city. Thomas stood among them. So did a leaner. Everyone wanted answers. The speaker was Alderman Robert Hale, one of the city's senior officials. He appeared exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. When he began speaking, the crowd immediately fell silent. The recovered records, he explained, described a period of severe unrest during the ancient outbreak. Fear had spread faster than the sickness itself. Citizens stopped trusting authorities. Rumors overwhelmed facts. Violence erupted between neighborhoods. Trade collapsed. Food shortages followed. The city nearly destroyed itself through panic. The message was clear. Blackmere faced a choice. Residents could remain united or repeat the mistakes of the past. The speech sounded reasonable. Many applauded. Others remained skeptical. The problem was simple. Trust, once damaged, proved difficult to restore. After months of illness, deaths, rumors, and uncertainty, reassurance alone could not erase anxiety. Still, the council hoped the warning would help. For a brief time, it seemed possible. Several guilds organized food assistance programs. Churches distributed bread. Merchants donated supplies to struggling families. Community efforts appeared throughout the city. People genuinely tried to support one another. Unfortunately, history often turns on small events, and Blackmere's next turning point arrived only a week later. It began in the northern grain district. A warehouse worker collapsed during a routine shift. Such incidents had become sadly common. The difference this time involved what happened afterward. Someone claimed the worker had recently handled grain imported from a distant kingdom. Another person insisted several dockworkers had fallen ill after unloading the same shipment. By evening, rumors linked foreign merchants to the outbreak. No evidence supported the accusation. That hardly mattered. Fear rarely waits for evidence. The following day, a crowd gathered near the docks. Arguments broke out. Several traders found themselves surrounded by angry citizens demanding explanations. Guards eventually restored order. Nobody was seriously injured. Yet the incident revealed how fragile the situation had become. People were looking for someone to blame. History offered countless examples of what happened next. Ancient Blackmere's records had described similar events. Now modern Blackmere was following the same path. Thomas sensed the change immediately. Conversations sounded different. Neighbors who once exchanged greetings now exchanged suspicions. Customers spent less time discussing weather or prices. Instead, they discussed responsibility. Whose fault was the sickness? Who had failed the city? Who could be trusted? The questions lingered everywhere. One evening, Thomas visited St. Aldwyn's Church to attend a prayer service. The building was unusually full. Candles flickered across stone walls. Soft voices echoed beneath the high ceiling. Father Benedict delivered a thoughtful sermon about fear. He spoke of how uncertainty encouraged people to seek simple explanations for complex problems. He urged compassion, patience, understanding. Many listeners nodded. Several wept quietly. The message resonated, yet even Father Benedict seemed aware that words alone might not be enough. Outside the church, reality waited, and reality was becoming increasingly difficult. Winter arrived early that year. Snow appeared before the end of November. At first only a light dusting covered rooftops. Then heavier storms followed. The streets became treacherous. Travel slowed. Supplies arrived less frequently. Markets remained open, but prices climbed steadily. Bread cost more. Firewood cost more. Everything cost more. For wealthy families, the increase was inconvenient. For laborers, it was dangerous. Thomas felt the pressure himself. Business had declined throughout autumn. Customers delayed purchases whenever possible. Repair jobs replaced new orders. Every coin mattered. Fortunately, he had managed to save modest reserves during better years. Many residents had not. As winter deepened, hardship spread. Long queues formed outside charitable kitchens. Churches distributed what food they could. Guild organizations helped members whenever possible. Still, resources remained limited. Blackmere possessed thousands of mouths to feed. The challenge grew larger each week. Then came the riots. Not large riots. Not at first. A dispute at a bakery escalated into a fight. Someone accused a merchant of hoarding flour. A window shattered. Several people were injured. The disturbance ended quickly, yet similar incidents followed elsewhere. A confrontation near the docks, an argument outside a warehouse, a clash between rival groups in the Eastern District. Individually, the events seemed minor. Together, they formed a troubling pattern. The scholars studying ancient records became increasingly concerned. The parallels were becoming impossible to ignore. One document described how unrest had begun with isolated confrontations, small disputes, minor violence, nothing catastrophic, until suddenly it became something much larger. The same progression now appeared visible in modern Blackmere. The council responded by increasing patrols. Additional guards appeared throughout the city. Important locations received protection. Curfews were discussed, but not immediately implemented. Officials hoped to avoid drastic measures. Nobody wanted to trigger additional panic. Meanwhile, excavations beneath the city continued. Despite winter weather, scholars remained determined to understand the past. The ancient documents represented their best opportunity to avoid repeating history. Several new discoveries emerged. Most were routine: inventories, letters, financial records. Then one remarkable document appeared, a preserved report written during the final weeks of the ancient disaster. The report described emergency actions taken by city authorities centuries earlier. At first, the contents seemed unremarkable. Restrictions on travel, food distribution efforts, additional security measures. Then investigators reached the final pages. There they found references to something unexpected, a location repeated several times, always mentioned with unusual emphasis. The place was called St. Verena's Quarter. No modern resident recognized the name. No current district carried that title. Maps revealed nothing. Records offered little clarification. Apparently, St. Verena's Quarter had vanished from history. Yet, according to the report, events occurring there had changed the course of the entire ancient crisis. Scholars became fascinated. Where had the district been located? Why had it disappeared? What happened there? The answers remained frustratingly elusive. Days later, another recovered map finally provided a clue. The vanished quarter had occupied land now buried beneath portions of the western city, specifically beneath areas connected to the sealed tunnels. The discovery generated enormous excitement among researchers. Perhaps the missing district explained everything. Perhaps the underground chambers were linked to its disappearance. Perhaps the ancient outbreak had reached its climax there. Excavation priorities shifted immediately. Teams focused efforts on locating additional evidence. Thomas first learned about St. Verena's Quarter while delivering barrels to a council warehouse. A clerk mentioned the discovery casually, yet the name lingered in his thoughts. A vanished district, an erased piece of history. Entire neighborhoods did not simply disappear without reason. Something significant must have happened, something worth remembering or worth forgetting. As December approached, snow covered Blackmere more frequently. White roofs contrasted sharply with dark streets below. For brief moments, the city looked almost beautiful. The winter landscape hid many unpleasant realities. Refuse piles disappeared beneath snowdrifts. Mud froze. Odors diminished. From a distance, Blackmere appeared cleaner than it had in months. Appearances, however, rarely told the full story. Beneath the snow, beneath the streets, beneath centuries of construction, the buried remains of St. Verena's Quarter waited. And late one evening, after weeks of searching, excavation teams finally located what appeared to be its outer boundary. The discovery triggered immediate celebrations among scholars. Those celebrations lasted less than an hour, because shortly after entering the newly uncovered area, workers found evidence that transformed excitement into alarm. The vanished district had not been abandoned gradually. It had not declined over time. It had been deliberately destroyed. Buildings had been torn down. Passages collapsed intentionally. Entire sections buried beneath tons of stone and earth. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase the place from existence. And hidden among the ruins Investigators discovered markings suggesting that the destruction occurred during the final days of the ancient outbreak. The implication was chilling. The people of Old Blackmere had not merely sealed tunnels, they had erased an entire neighborhood from history, and whatever happened there had frightened them so badly that they wanted future generations to forget it had ever existed. And whatever happened there had frightened them so badly that they wanted future generations to forget it had ever existed. News of the discovery spread across Blackmere before the next sunrise. Nobody officially announced it. Nobody needed to. Workers talked, guards talked, scribes talked. By breakfast, taverns throughout the city buzzed with discussions about the lost district of St. Verena's Quarter. Some people treated the story like an exciting mystery. Others regarded it as an ominous warning. Most residents settled somewhere between the two. Thomas listened to the conversations while repairing a shipment of damaged ale barrels. Every customer seemed to have a theory. One merchant believed St. Verena's Quarter had housed criminals. A blacksmith insisted it had been destroyed during a forgotten rebellion. An elderly widow claimed her grandfather once spoke of a cursed neighborhood swallowed by plague. No one possessed evidence. The lack of facts only encouraged imagination. Meanwhile, scholars continued examining the ruins. The buried district proved larger than expected. Foundations of homes emerged beneath layers of stone. Fragments of streets appeared. Collapsed courtyards surfaced from centuries of darkness. The discoveries confirmed that St. Verena's Quarter had once housed hundreds of people, possibly thousands. Yet one detail puzzled investigators. The destruction looked organized, methodical. Entire blocks appeared intentionally dismantled. The process would have required planning, labor, time. People rarely buried an entire district unless they considered it absolutely necessary. The question remained, necessary for what? Winter tightened its grip on Blackmere. Cold winds swept through alleyways. Ice formed along drainage channels. Snow gathered against city walls. The sickness continued circulating, though less aggressively than during autumn. Some interpreted the decline as a sign of improvement. Others remained cautious. After months of uncertainty, optimism felt dangerous. The council encouraged patience. Priests encouraged faith. Citizens encouraged one another whenever possible. Yet tension lingered beneath daily life. The city had changed. Everyone felt it. One evening, Thomas attended a gathering organized by Father Benedict. The priest had invited residents from various neighborhoods to discuss concerns and share information. The church hall filled quickly. Candles illuminated worried faces. People exchanged stories. Some described family members recovering from illness. Others spoke of relatives who had not survived. Several discussed rising prices. A few mentioned fears about social unrest. The meeting remained peaceful, respectful. For a while, Thomas allowed himself to believe that Blackmere might avoid repeating history. Then a traveler stood and shared troubling news. He had arrived from a nearby town only 2 days earlier. According to his account, merchants throughout the region were beginning to avoid Blackmere. Trade routes shifted elsewhere. Caravans chose alternate destinations. The city's reputation was deteriorating. The announcement cast a shadow across the room. Blackmere depended on commerce. Reduced trade meant fewer supplies, fewer opportunities, fewer resources. The implications were obvious. When the meeting ended, people left quietly. Nobody felt reassured. A week later, the scholars made another discovery. This one emerged from the center of St. Verena's quarter. Workers clearing debris uncovered the remains of a public building. At first, they believed it to be a guild hall. Further examination suggested something else. The structure had served as an emergency command center during the ancient crisis. Documents found within supported that conclusion. Records covered walls. Messages appeared scratched onto wooden panels. Lists of supplies littered the floor. The place looked as though officials had abandoned it in tremendous haste. Among the recovered materials was a partially preserved ledger. Its pages described the final weeks before the district disappeared. The writing proved difficult to decipher. Several sections were damaged beyond recovery. Enough survived to paint a disturbing picture. According to the ledger, authorities had gradually lost control of St. Verena's quarter, not because of disease alone, because fear had transformed into something more dangerous. Trust collapsed. Neighbors accused neighbors. Food deliveries stopped reaching certain streets. Guards refused assignments within parts of the district. Officials struggled to maintain order. The situation worsened day by day. The descriptions sounded alarmingly familiar. Blackmere's scholars exchanged worried glances as they translated the text. Modern events had not reached that stage. Not yet, but some parallels were becoming uncomfortable. Thomas learned portions of the ledger during a public reading several days later. The crowd listened in silence. No one interrupted. No one laughed. The atmosphere felt heavy, as though the city itself understood the warning. The reading concluded shortly before sunset. People dispersed slowly. Conversations remained subdued. Even the usual marketplace arguments seemed quieter. For a brief period, the ancient records achieved what official speeches could not. They reminded residents that panic carried consequences. Unfortunately, history rarely follows a straight line. Progress often arrives alongside setbacks. Only 3 nights after the reading, a warehouse fire broke out near the river district. The blaze began shortly after midnight. Strong winds spread flames rapidly. Alarm bells rang across the city. Residents rushed from their homes carrying buckets. Fire brigades formed lines. The struggle lasted until dawn. Several buildings were destroyed. Fortunately, loss of life remained limited. Investigators never determined the cause. Accident, carelessness, arson, every explanation found supporters. The uncertainty proved almost as damaging as the fire itself. Rumors exploded. Some blamed desperate thieves. Others blamed angry merchants. A few claimed enemies of the city were responsible. Fear filled the gaps where facts should have been. Again, always again, Father Benedict later remarked that uncertainty seemed to be Blackmere's greatest enemy. Thomas increasingly agreed. The sickness frightened people. The economic hardship frightened people. Yet the unknown frightened them even more. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Every mystery encouraged new speculation. Every rumor generated 3 more. Winter deepened. Christmas approached. Despite everything, life continued. Children still played in snowy streets. Families still gathered around fires. Churches still celebrated holy days. Human beings possessed remarkable resilience. Even troubled cities continued living. One afternoon, Thomas took Margaret to the market. The child laughed while watching snowflakes drift through the air. For a few minutes, he forgot about tunnels, forgot about sickness, forgot about ancient disasters. He simply enjoyed hearing his daughter laugh. The moment felt precious, rare, a reminder of what everyone hoped to preserve. Blackmere was more than its troubles, more than its fears. It was home. That realization strengthened his determination. Whatever happened, he wanted the city to endure. Many residents felt the same. Unknown to them, scholars working beneath the Western Quarter had just uncovered evidence that would test that determination. Deep within the buried command center, hidden beneath fallen beams and centuries of debris, investigators discovered a sealed chest. Unlike most artifacts recovered from St. Verena's quarter, the chest remained intact. Iron bands protected its exterior. A heavy lock secured the lid. The container appeared deliberately preserved, as though someone had wanted its contents to survive. The chest was transported to the town hall under guard. Officials gathered to witness its opening. Priests attended. Scribes prepared copies. Excitement filled the room. At last, perhaps, the city would learn what happened during the final days of the ancient crisis. The lock was broken. The lid opened. Inside lay dozens of documents. Letters, reports, personal accounts, emergency orders, and at the very bottom rested a final manuscript bearing an unsettling title written in faded ink. It translated roughly as, "The account of the night the city turned upon itself." The room fell silent because everyone present immediately understood one thing. The lost district had not been destroyed by disease. It had not vanished because of plague. It had not disappeared because of fire. something else had happened, something so devastating that survivors recorded it separately from every other event. And as scholars began reading the first pages of the manuscript, they realized they were about to uncover the darkest chapter in Blackmere's forgotten history, a chapter whose warning might arrive 3 centuries too late, a chapter whose warning might arrive 3 centuries too late. The manuscript immediately became the most important document in Blackmere. Copies were forbidden. Access was restricted. Guards protected the town hall archive day and night. Yet, despite those precautions, news of the discovery spread rapidly. People knew very little about the manuscript itself. They knew only its title. That was enough. The account of the night the city turned upon itself. The phrase captured imaginations throughout Blackmere. Residents repeated it in marketplaces. Taverns echoed with discussions about it. Children whispered the words as though they belonged to a ghost story. The title carried a sense of dread unlike anything discovered so far. Disease was frightening. Poverty was frightening. Ancient tunnels were unsettling. But the idea of an entire city turning against itself struck something deeper, something more personal, because every resident understood what it meant. It meant neighbors becoming enemies, friends becoming strangers, communities breaking apart, and perhaps that possibility frightened people more than illness ever could. For several days, scholars worked almost continuously. The manuscript proved lengthy. Its pages contained first-hand observations, written by an official who had survived the ancient disaster. The writer never identified himself by name. He referred to himself only as a servant of the city, yet his descriptions possessed remarkable detail. As translation progressed, a picture slowly emerged. The ancient outbreak had indeed begun, much like the modern one. Poor sanitation, contaminated water, crowded living conditions, disease, fear, economic disruption. The similarities remained striking. Then the manuscript described something different, something unexpected. The sickness began affecting trade routes. Food shortages followed. Prices rose dramatically. Residents grew desperate. Rumors flourished. Authorities struggled to maintain confidence. Again, the pattern felt familiar, uncomfortably familiar. The real turning point arrived when false accusations began spreading through St. Verena's quarter. One group blamed merchants. Another blamed travelers. Others blamed religious minorities, foreign laborers, or neighboring districts. No accusation required proof. The city simply wanted explanations. Any explanation seemed preferable to uncertainty. The anonymous writer described how rumors multiplied until truth became almost irrelevant. People stopped asking whether stories were accurate. They asked only whether stories confirmed existing fears. That observation struck many scholars as surprisingly modern. Human nature, it seemed. changed very little across centuries. Thomas first heard portions of the manuscript during a public address delivered by Father Benedict. The church was packed, every bench filled. Additional listeners stood along the walls. The priest spoke carefully. He wanted residents to understand the warning without provoking additional panic. The balance proved difficult. As he read translated passages, silence filled the room. The words felt less like history and more like prophecy. Afterward, groups remained outside, discussing what they had heard. Some agreed completely. Others argued that modern Blackmere differed from the ancient city. Thomas hoped they were right, yet he could not ignore the similarities, especially when examples seemed to appear almost daily. One afternoon, an argument erupted in the central market. A customer accused a butcher of secretly withholding meat to raise prices. The butcher denied it. Witnesses joined the debate. Soon, dozens of people surrounded them. Voices rose. Insults followed. Eventually, guards intervened. No one was seriously harmed. Still, the incident reflected a growing problem. Trust was becoming scarce, and scarcity often spread faster than abundance. Winter storms intensified after the new year. Heavy snow blanketed rooftops. Roads beyond the city walls became difficult to travel. Several supply caravans arrived late. Others failed to arrive entirely. Prices increased again. Not catastrophically, not yet, but enough for residents to notice, enough to fuel concern. The council responded by organizing emergency food reserves. Guild leaders contributed supplies. Churches expanded charitable efforts. The measures helped, yet many citizens worried about what might happen if conditions worsened. The manuscript's warnings lingered in everyone's thoughts. Then scholars reached the section describing the actual night referenced by the title, the section that gave the document its name. The town hall reading room remained unusually quiet as translators worked through the damaged pages. Several passages were missing. Others remained difficult to interpret. Enough survived, far more than anyone expected. According to the account, tensions in St. Verena's quarter reached a breaking point during a particularly harsh winter. Food shortages intensified. Disease continued spreading. Authorities struggled to maintain order. Then a rumor emerged. A devastating rumor. Someone claimed that city officials were secretly distributing supplies only to favored districts, while allowing St. Verena's quarter to suffer. The accusation was false. The manuscript repeatedly emphasized that point. Yet facts no longer mattered. The story spread rapidly. Anger followed. Crowds formed. Protests escalated. Before long, violence erupted. The anonymous writer described streets filled with shouting. Windows shattered. Storehouses attacked. Guards overwhelmed. The situation deteriorated with astonishing speed. Most disturbing of all, the manuscript suggested that many participants genuinely believed they were protecting their families. Nobody considered themselves villains. They considered themselves desperate. That distinction mattered. History often portrayed disasters as struggles between good and evil. Reality proved more complicated. The people destroying their city believed they were saving it. When scholars shared these passages with city leaders, concern deepened considerably. The parallels were no longer theoretical. Blackmere itself was experiencing rising prices, supply difficulties, growing suspicion, social tension. The ingredients existed. Everyone recognized it. No one knew how to prevent the recipe from repeating. Thomas noticed increased guard patrols throughout January. Officials clearly felt the same concern. Important warehouses received protection. Public meetings became more common. Community leaders encouraged cooperation. For a time, the strategy appeared effective. Violence remained limited. Life continued. Perhaps the warning would arrive early enough. Perhaps history could be avoided. Then another problem emerged, one far less dramatic, yet potentially just as dangerous. Counterfeit rumors. The term did not exist, of course, but the phenomenon certainly did. False stories began appearing everywhere. One day citizens heard that a district would be quarantined. The next day the story proved false. Someone claimed bread supplies were exhausted. That proved false too. Another rumor insisted merchants planned to abandon the city entirely. Also false. The constant flood of misinformation exhausted everyone. People no longer knew what to believe. Official announcements, unofficial claims, eyewitness accounts, speculation. The boundaries blurred. The manuscript had described the same thing. That realization unsettled scholars more than almost anything else, because once truth became uncertain, almost every other problem became harder to solve. One freezing evening, Thomas returned home after delivering barrels to a riverside warehouse. Snow drifted through the darkness. The city seemed strangely quiet. Most residents remained indoors. Light glowed from windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. For a brief moment, Blackmere appeared peaceful. Then church bells began ringing unexpectedly. Not funeral bells, alarm bells. Thomas stopped walking. Several doors opened nearby. Residents emerged into the street. The bells continued. Across the city, other towers joined them. The sound rolled through the night like distant thunder. Something had happened. People exchanged nervous glances. No one yet knew what. Within minutes, messengers appeared. Their news spread rapidly. A large crowd had gathered near one of the western food depots. Arguments over supply distributions had escalated. Guards were attempting to restore order. The situation remained unclear. Thomas felt a chill, unrelated to the weather. The manuscript's warnings immediately returned to mind. Crowds, supplies, rumors. Fear. The pattern felt dangerously familiar. Fortunately, the disturbance ended before reaching true disaster. Several arrests were made. The crowd dispersed. No lives were lost. Yet the incident served as another warning. Blackmere stood closer to the edge than many realized. The scholars understood it. The council understood it. Increasingly, ordinary citizens understood it too. Weeks later, the manuscript revealed another startling detail. The violence described in St. Verena's quarter had not ended in a single night. The famous night the city turned upon itself merely marked the beginning. The real catastrophe unfolded afterward. Over the following weeks, distrust became so severe that entire neighborhoods stopped cooperating with one another. Trade ceased between districts. Information stopped flowing. Emergency responses collapsed. The city fractured into isolated communities. And according to the anonymous writer, that fragmentation proved more destructive than the disease itself. When this passage became known, Father Benedict reportedly sat in silence for nearly an hour. The warning seemed obvious. A city survived through cooperation. Without it, every crisis became worse. Disease, famine, winter, all became more dangerous. Blackmere still had time. Perhaps, yet time was slipping away. Because while scholars studied ancient mistakes and leaders attempted to preserve unity, another discovery had emerged from beneath the buried ruins of St. Verena's quarter. A discovery hidden beneath the foundation of a collapsed administrative building. Workers had uncovered a sealed chamber. Unlike previous rooms, this one showed no signs of looting or disturbance. Its entrance had been deliberately concealed. As excavation continued, investigators realized the chamber contained something extraordinary. Not records, not skeletons, not artifacts. It contained emergency supplies, thousands of items carefully stored and preserved. Food containers, tools, medical equipment, blankets, water barrels, enough resources to support hundreds of people. The implications stunned everyone. Because the supplies had never been distributed, they had remained hidden while the district collapsed around them. And if scholars interpreted the evidence correctly, the ancient disaster might have been far worse than anyone imagined. Not because the city lacked resources, but because people stopped trusting each other long enough to use them. Not because the city lacked resources, but because people stopped trusting each other long enough to use them. The discovery shocked Blackmere. For months, people had assumed the ancient city failed because it lacked solutions. The hidden chamber suggested something entirely different. The resources had existed. Food had existed. Medical supplies had existed. Emergency equipment had existed. Yet somehow none of it reached the people who needed it. The implication disturbed scholars more than any skeleton or collapsed tunnel. Human mistakes could be corrected. Natural disasters could be endured. Disease could eventually pass. But what happened when fear prevented people from helping one another? That question lingered over Blackmere like a winter cloud. The council ordered a complete inventory of the hidden chamber. Workers carefully removed every item. Scribes recorded everything. The process took several days. Citizens waited impatiently for updates. When the final report emerged, the numbers were astonishing. The supplies could have sustained nearly 1,000 residents for weeks, perhaps longer, enough to prevent much of the suffering described in the ancient records, enough to save lives, enough to change history. Yet the supplies had remained underground, unused, forgotten, buried alongside the district itself. Father Benedict later described the discovery as one of the saddest historical findings he had ever encountered, not because of what had happened, because of what might have happened instead. Thomas found himself thinking about that often, especially during long evenings beside the fire. The city had become obsessed with the mistakes of the past, perhaps for good reason. Every new discovery seemed to contain another warning, another lesson, another example of how easily communities could unravel. Yet Blackmere continued, moving forward. Winter eventually began loosening its grip. By February, snowstorms arrived less frequently. The days grew slightly longer. Sunlight lingered a little later each evening. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, but people noticed them. After months of darkness and uncertainty, even small improvements felt significant. Market activity increased. Travel resumed gradually. A handful of merchants returned. For the first time in many months, optimism cautiously reappeared. Not everywhere, not in everyone, but enough to be felt. The sickness still existed. Cases still occurred. Funeral bells still rang. Yet the overwhelming wave that had dominated the previous seasons seemed to be weakening. Even the physicians noticed. Recovery rates improved. New infections appeared less frequently. The trend encouraged hope. The council welcomed it. The churches welcomed it. Ordinary citizens welcomed it most of all. Then, unexpectedly, the manuscript revealed its darkest passage. The final section, the part explaining why Saint Verena's quarter had ultimately been destroyed. The scholars gathered inside the town hall archive shortly after dawn. Several had spent weeks translating damaged pages. Now they reached the conclusion. The room remained silent as the final text was read aloud. According to the anonymous writer, the unrest eventually became so severe that the district effectively separated itself from the rest of the city. Roads were barricaded. Communication collapsed. Supplies stopped moving. Residents trusted nobody outside their immediate communities. Attempts at negotiation failed repeatedly. The sickness worsened conditions further. Then came the decision. The terrible decision. city leaders concluded that restoring order had become impossible. The district was evacuated wherever possible. Structures were dismantled. Underground passages were sealed. Entire streets were buried. Future generations would remember the event only vaguely. The goal was not punishment. The goal was containment, not of disease, of chaos. That distinction stunned everyone. For months, people had assumed the lost district disappeared because of plague. The manuscript revealed another truth. The disease had started the crisis. Human behavior had completed it. When news spread through Blackmere, reactions varied. Some people rejected the conclusion. Others accepted it immediately. Most simply sat in thoughtful silence. The lesson felt uncomfortable. It offered no villain, no monster, no enemy army, no supernatural curse. Instead, it suggested that ordinary people, acting out of fear, had contributed to their own downfall. History rarely delivers comfortable messages. This one certainly did not. Thomas discussed the manuscript with Alina one evening after Margaret had fallen asleep. The fire crackled softly. Rain tapped against the shutters. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Alina broke the silence. They weren't evil. Thomas looked at her. No, they were afraid. He nodded slowly. The distinction mattered, perhaps more than anything else. The people of St. Verena's quarter had likely loved their families, worked hard, prayed, dreamed, worried, just like modern residents of Blackmere. The realization made the story feel personal, not ancient, not distant, human, very human. Spring approached gradually. The city changed with it. Snow melted. Roads improved. Trade increased. The worst of winter receded into memory. Life became easier. Not easy, just easier. Yet even as conditions improved, excavation work continued beneath the western quarter. Scholars remained determined to uncover the full history of the buried district. The manuscript answered many questions. Others remained unresolved. Several mysteries persisted. Why had some records been hidden separately? Why had certain passages been deliberately destroyed? And perhaps most importantly, what happened to the survivors after the district vanished? The manuscript ended before addressing that question. Additional documents might exist. Somewhere, the search continued. One afternoon, workers clearing debris near the center of St. Verena's quarter uncovered a small stone building, remarkably preserved beneath centuries of rubble. Unlike surrounding structures, it had not been dismantled. It had been protected. The discovery immediately attracted attention. Investigators carefully entered the structure. Inside, they found rows of shelves, writing desks, storage chests. It appeared to be a record office, a forgotten archive. Excitement spread rapidly. If additional documents survived, they might finally answer remaining questions. The first recovered materials proved disappointing. Tax records, property disputes, routine correspondence. Interesting to historians, perhaps. Not revolutionary. Then workers opened a locked cabinet hidden behind a collapsed wall. Within it rested dozens of sealed letters. The wax seals had long since cracked, yet many documents remained readable. Most were personal, messages exchanged between families during the final days of St. Verena's quarter. The letters transformed understanding of the disaster. For the first time, scholars could hear ordinary voices, not officials, not priests, not administrators, regular citizens, parents, workers, shopkeepers, neighbors. Their words painted a heartbreaking picture. People worried about food, worried about loved ones, worried about rumors. Many expressed confusion. Several complained that nobody seemed to know what was true anymore. One writer described hearing 5 contradictory stories before breakfast. Another begged relatives not to believe everything they heard. A third wrote simply, "We no longer fear the sickness as much as we fear each other." The sentence spread throughout Blackmere within days. People repeated it everywhere. Markets, churches, workshops. The words felt timeless, disturbingly timeless. Father Benedict later quoted the line during a sermon attended by hundreds. Many listeners lowered their heads. The message required little explanation. Months passed. Gradually, conditions improved. The sickness weakened. Trade stabilized. Public confidence returned. Not completely. Scars remained. Families mourned losses. Businesses struggled to recover. The city would not forget the difficult year, yet survival increasingly seemed possible, perhaps even likely. For the first time since the original tunnel collapse, Blackmere could imagine a future beyond crisis. Then another discovery emerged. One final mystery, one final piece of the ancient puzzle. Deep within the forgotten archive, investigators uncovered a map unlike any found before. The document showed St. Verena's quarter shortly before its destruction. Every street appeared, every building, every alley. At first, the map seemed ordinary. Then scholars noticed markings added in red ink. Several locations had been circled. Notes appeared in the margins. Directions pointed toward a place not mentioned anywhere else. A place hidden beneath the district. A place labeled only with 3 words. The chamber below. No surviving record explained what it meant. No manuscript referenced it. No letter described it. Yet, according to the map, it existed. Somewhere beneath the buried remains of St. Verena's quarter. And if the markings were accurate, the chamber had been important enough for multiple officials to document during the final days before the district vanished. The discovery reignited excitement throughout the excavation teams, because After months of studying the disaster, they had uncovered one more secret, one more place, one more mystery, hidden beneath the dirtiest city anyone could remember. And somewhere below the ruins of St. Verena's Quarter, untouched for 300 years, something was waiting to be found. And somewhere below the ruins of St. Verena's Quarter, untouched for 300 years, something was waiting to be found. The map transformed the excavation almost overnight. For months, the scholars had focused on understanding the past. Now, they possessed a tangible objective: the chamber below. No one knew what the name meant. No surviving record explained it. Yet every investigator agreed on one thing: whoever created the map considered the location important. Very important. The red markings appeared deliberate, careful, urgent, the sort of annotations someone made while trying to preserve information before it vanished forever. Work crews immediately began comparing the map against existing tunnel surveys. The task proved difficult. 3 centuries had changed the underground landscape dramatically. Collapses altered passageways. Floods erased landmarks. Entire sections of St. Verena's Quarter now existed beneath layers of rubble. Finding a single chamber would not be easy. Nevertheless, progress came faster than expected. Within 2 weeks, engineers identified a possible route. A forgotten corridor extended beneath the center of the ruined district. The passage appeared to align with several map references. The discovery generated excitement throughout Blackmere. Even residents, who cared little about history, followed developments closely. After all, the tunnels had become part of the city's identity. The story belonged to everyone now. Thomas followed updates whenever he could. Business was improving. Customers returned. New barrel orders arrived. The workshop once again echoed with the sounds of productive labor. Yet he still found himself curious about the underground discoveries. Many residents did. The hidden city beneath the city seemed impossible to ignore. Spring advanced steadily. Trees outside the walls began producing fresh leaves. Fields turned green once more. Birdsong returned to the countryside. The change in season lifted spirits throughout Blackmere. Markets grew busier. Travelers returned. The city felt alive again. Not completely healed, but recovering. Recovery, however, did not erase memory. People still discussed the difficult winter. Families still remembered losses. The lessons of St. Verena's Quarter remained fresh. Perhaps that was why interest in the excavation persisted. Residents wanted understanding. They wanted meaning. They wanted assurance that history's warnings would not be wasted. Several weeks later, the search teams made a breakthrough. A collapsed staircase was discovered beneath the remains of an administrative building. The structure descended deeper than any previously explored section of the district. Engineers examined the site carefully. The staircase appeared intentionally hidden. Several upper levels had been filled with stone and debris long ago. Someone clearly wanted to prevent access. The discovery immediately attracted attention. Could this be the route shown on the map? The possibility seemed promising. Work began at once. Laborers removed rubble. Surveyors documented progress. Priests offered blessings before crews entered the newly opened passage. A sense of anticipation spread through the city. Even the council members appeared excited. At last, after months of investigation, Blackmere seemed close to uncovering its final secret. The staircase descended farther than expected. One level, then another, then another. The air grew colder underground. The stonework changed as well. Unlike the crude drainage tunnels, these passages displayed remarkable craftsmanship. Smooth walls, carefully fitted masonry, architectural details unseen elsewhere beneath the city. The deeper explorers traveled, the older everything appeared. Some scholars began suggesting that portions of the structure might predate Blackmere itself. The idea fascinated everyone. Perhaps the hidden city contained layers of history stretching even further into the past. Several days later, a messenger arrived at the town hall, carrying extraordinary news. The staircase had ended, and beyond it workers had discovered a sealed bronze door. The announcement spread across Blackmere within hours. Crowds gathered near excavation entrances, hopping for updates. Speculation exploded. Treasure, royal archives, religious relics. Everyone possessed a theory. Few proved realistic. The bronze door itself became the subject of intense study. Unlike previous barriers, it showed no signs of damage. The metal remained surprisingly well preserved. Strange symbols decorated its surface. Some resembled religious imagery. Others appeared purely decorative. None matched known records from St. Verena's quarter. Scholars worked tirelessly attempting to interpret the markings. Progress remained slow. Meanwhile, the city waited. Patience has never been humanity's strongest quality. Thomas visited the site one afternoon. While delivering barrels requested by excavation crews, from a safe distance, he watched laborers hauling equipment underground. The atmosphere reminded him of preparations for a military campaign. Everyone sensed importance. No one knew exactly what awaited beyond the door. The uncertainty fueled excitement. Several days later, engineers determined the entrance could be opened safely. A small team was selected. Surveyors, scholars, masons, priests. The city practically held its breath. When the day arrived, crowds filled nearby streets despite official requests to stay away. Thomas joined them. Hours passed. No news emerged. Then, shortly before sunset, the first explorers returned. Their expressions immediately silenced the crowd, not because they appeared frightened, because they appeared astonished. Something extraordinary had been found. The details emerged slowly over the following days. Beyond the bronze door lay a vast underground complex, not a single chamber, an entire network of rooms, storage halls, workshops, meeting spaces, living quarters. The scale exceeded all expectations. Apparently, hundreds of people could have occupied the complex, perhaps more. Most remarkable of all, the site appeared largely untouched. Furniture remained in place. Tools rested where workers had left them centuries earlier. Records filled shelves. It was as though the inhabitants had vanished yesterday. The discovery transformed historical understanding overnight. St. Verena's Quarter had possessed a hidden underground counterpart, a secret world beneath the streets. The realization raised obvious questions. Why build such a place? Who used it? And why was it abandoned? Investigators searched for answers. The records provided clues. Gradually, a narrative emerged. During the ancient crisis, city leaders established the underground complex as an emergency operations center. The goal was practical: protect supplies, coordinate relief efforts, maintain communication, preserve order. The project represented an extraordinary undertaking, a desperate attempt to save the city. For a time, it seemed successful. The records described organized food distribution, medical assistance, public planning, hope. For the first time in months, the story of St. Verena's Quarter appeared less tragic. Here was evidence of cooperation, evidence of people trying to help one another. Yet everyone knew the district still disappeared. Something had gone wrong. The deeper investigators explored, the clearer that became. One section of the complex showed signs of sudden abandonment. Documents remained unfinished. Meals remained uneaten. Personal belongings remained scattered throughout rooms. The inhabitants appeared to have left in great haste, or perhaps they never had the opportunity to leave at all. The evidence remained unclear. Then came another discovery. Inside a council chamber near the center of the underground complex, scholars found a series of meeting records. The final entries were especially revealing. According to the documents, leaders of St. Verena's Quarter recognized the danger posed by fear and misinformation. They repeatedly warned citizens against rumors. They encouraged transparency, communication, unity. For a while, those efforts worked. Then trust began eroding, slowly at first, then rapidly. The records described growing resistance. Citizens questioned official announcements. Conspiracy theories spread. Accusations multiplied. The pattern sounded painfully familiar. Once again, the past seemed to mirror the present. One sentence, in particular, attracted attention. Written only days before the district's disappearance, it stated, "We possess food. We possess medicine. We possess shelter. Yet each day fewer people believe us." The lines circulated throughout Blackmere almost immediately. Many considered it the most tragic sentence recovered from the entire excavation because it captured the central lesson of St. Verena's quarter. Resources mattered, planning mattered, leadership mattered, but trust mattered too. Without trust, every other solution weakened, perhaps failed entirely. Weeks passed. Exploration continued. More records surfaced. More details emerged. The underground complex gradually surrendered its secrets. Then investigators reached the deepest section, a level not shown on any known map, a place hidden even from most of the emergency planners. There, behind another sealed entrance, they found a small archive room. Unlike the rest of the complex, this chamber contained only a handful of documents. Yet those documents appeared exceptionally important. Several bore official seals. Others carried personal signatures from leaders involved in the ancient crisis. At the center of the room rested a wooden chest. Inside it lay a collection of final reports, reports written during the last days before St. Verena's quarter vanished. Reports that promised to answer the question everyone had been asking for months. What exactly happened at the end? Why did the district disappear? Why was it erased from history? And why had survivors gone to such extraordinary lengths to bury the truth? As scholars began reading the first pages, a chilling realization spread through the room. The final disaster had not started underground. It had not started in government halls. It had not started with disease. It had started with a single false story that everyone desperately wanted to believe. It had started with a single false story that everyone desperately wanted to believe. The report was written in hurried handwriting. Several pages contained corrections. Ink stains covered the margins. Whoever authored the document had clearly been working under tremendous pressure. Yet despite the imperfections, the message remained painfully clear. The final collapse of St. Verena's quarter did not begin with hunger. It did not begin with disease. It did not begin with violence. Those problems already existed. The collapse began when a rumor appeared at exactly the wrong moment. According to the report, an anonymous message started circulating through the district during the harshest period of the ancient winter. The claim was simple, simple enough for anyone to understand, simple enough for anyone to repeat. It alleged that city officials had secretly reserved large quantities of food for themselves, while ordinary citizens suffered. The accusation spread rapidly. People repeated it in markets. They repeated it in workshops. They repeated it in homes. Soon nearly everyone had heard the story. The problem was that it wasn't true. The emergency records proved it. Inventory lists proved it. Witness statements proved it. Yet facts arrived too slowly. The rumor arrived first, and once people accepted it, evidence struggled to catch up. The anonymous writer described the process with remarkable frustration. Every attempt to correct the story seemed to strengthen belief in it. Citizens interpreted denials as proof of deception. Official explanations were viewed with suspicion. Even community leaders lost credibility. Trust, once damaged, deteriorated rapidly. When scholars shared the findings with Blackmere's council, the reaction was immediate. The lessons felt alarmingly relevant. The city had spent the past year fighting not only sickness, but misinformation. False stories had repeatedly caused confusion. Fortunately, unlike ancient Saint Verena's quarter, modern Blackmere still possessed time to learn. At least that was the hope. Thomas heard portions of the report during a public gathering outside St. Aldwyn's Church. The crowd listened carefully. Many appeared uncomfortable, not because the historical events were shocking, because they sounded familiar. Every resident could recall recent rumors that had swept through the city. False reports about food shortages, false reports about quarantines, false reports about merchants abandoning Blackmere. The parallels were impossible to ignore. For the first time, many citizens began discussing trust as seriously as they discussed disease. That shift mattered, perhaps more than anyone realized. Spring continued, transforming the city. Trees blossomed, gardens reappeared, children returned to playing outdoors. Life slowly reclaimed spaces once dominated by fear. Even Rat Alley seemed brighter. The same crooked buildings remained. The same narrow streets remained. Yet the atmosphere had changed. People smiled more often. Conversations sounded lighter. Hope returned cautiously, like sunlight after a long storm. Peter's recovery continued as well. The young apprentice had regained much of his strength. He once again worked full days at the workshop. Though thinner than before, he seemed determined to make up for lost time. Thomas welcomed the help. Business was growing steadily. The city needed barrels. Merchants needed containers. Breweries needed supplies. Commerce was returning. Recovery, however, never follows a perfectly smooth path. Several challenges remained. Food prices had not fully stabilized. Many families still struggled. Some neighborhoods suffered greater losses than others. Healing required time, and Blackmere still carried scars. Meanwhile, scholars continued examining the final reports recovered from the underground archive. The documents revealed increasingly detailed accounts of St. Verena's last days. The district's leaders had not ignored the crisis. In fact, they worked tirelessly to prevent disaster. Committees organized aid. Volunteers distributed supplies. Medical stations treated the sick. Communication networks attempted to counter false information. For a while, the system functioned. Then came exhaustion. The reports emphasized this repeatedly. People grew tired of uncertainty, tired of fear, tired of waiting, tired of hearing conflicting stories. Exhaustion weakened judgment. It made communities vulnerable. The anonymous writer seemed convinced that weariness proved nearly as dangerous as the original disease. That observation resonated with many readers. Blackmere understood exhaustion. The city had spent more than a year enduring hardship. Residents knew exactly how draining uncertainty could become. One afternoon, Father Benedict visited Thomas's workshop, carrying a copy of several translated passages. The priest appeared thoughtful, perhaps even troubled. After exchanging greetings, he shared one particular section. The writer described a meeting held shortly before St. Verena's collapse. During the gathering, officials reviewed food inventories, medical supplies, and security reports. Objectively, conditions had begun improving. The worst shortages were easing. The sickness was declining. The district possessed reasons for optimism. Yet public confidence continued falling. The contrast puzzled leaders. Then one official reportedly made a simple observation. People no longer judge reality by what they see. He paused. They judge reality by what they fear. The sentence lingered in Thomas's thoughts long after Father Benedict departed, because it explained so much. Fear changes perception. Fear changes behavior. Fear changes communities. Perhaps that was the true lesson buried beneath St. Verena's ruins. Not that disease destroys cities. Not that poverty destroys cities. But that fear can magnify every problem. Summer approached. The anniversary of the original tunnel collapse drew near. Residents began reflecting on everything that had happened since that stormy night. The sickness, the excavations, the discoveries, the buried district, the ancient warnings. An entire year had passed. Blackmere survived. That realization felt significant. No celebrations occurred. The losses remained too recent. Yet quiet gratitude spread through the city. People appreciated ordinary days again. Ordinary meals. Ordinary conversations. Ordinary work. Simple things seemed valuable. The excavation teams eventually reached the final sections of the underground complex. Most major discoveries had already been made. Researchers focused on details now, cataloging records, preserving artifacts, documenting architecture. The work promised to continue for years, perhaps decades. History rarely reveals all its secrets at once. Even so, one final mystery remained unresolved. The anonymous writer. No document identified him. No signature appeared. No clear evidence revealed his identity. Yet the reports demonstrated intimate knowledge of events. Who was he? A council member, a clerk, a priest, a volunteer? The question fascinated scholars. Several competing theories emerged. None could be proven. Then, quite unexpectedly, a clue appeared. Hidden among routine records, investigators discovered a personal journal. Unlike official documents, the journal focused on everyday experiences: meals, meetings, weather, minor frustrations, the sort of details rarely preserved by history. At first, the notebook seemed unremarkable. Then researchers noticed similarities in handwriting, the same distinctive letter shapes, the same unusual punctuation marks. The journal's author appeared to be the mysterious writer. Excitement spread immediately. Perhaps the identity puzzle would finally be solved. The journal belonged to a municipal clerk named Edwin Marr. He occupied no position of great power, no noble title, no famous office, just a clerk, a record keeper, an ordinary man performing ordinary duties during extraordinary times. The discovery surprised many people. They expected someone important, someone influential. Instead, the most detailed account of St. Verena's quarter came from a person history would otherwise have forgotten. The revelation carried its own lesson. Sometimes the most valuable witnesses are not rulers or generals. Sometimes they are ordinary people paying attention. Edwin Marr's journal provided additional context. He described neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers delivering food, citizens risking their safety for strangers. The district's story contained tragedy, yes, but also courage, compassion, resilience. The balance mattered. Without it, history became incomplete. As summer sunlight returned to Blackmere, scholars gradually assembled a fuller picture of the ancient disaster. The conclusion differed from popular assumptions. St. Verena's quarter had not been destroyed because people were uniquely foolish, nor because they were uniquely wicked. They were human, the same as anyone. Faced with uncertainty, they made mistakes. Faced with fear, they sometimes chose poorly. Yet they also demonstrated generosity and bravery. The truth proved complicated. Reality often is. One evening, nearly a year after the original tunnel collapse, Thomas walked through the city with Margaret. The child was older now, more energetic, more curious. She pointed at market stalls and asked endless questions. Thomas answered patiently. The city bustled around them. Merchants traded. Musicians performed. Children laughed. Life continued. For the first time in many months, Blackmere felt genuinely alive, not merely surviving, living. As the sun began setting, church bells echoed across the rooftops. Their sound no longer carried only grief. Sometimes they marked weddings, festivals, ordinary celebrations. The city had endured. The future remained uncertain. It always would. Yet Blackmere possessed something it lacked during the darkest days of the crisis. Perspective. The buried district of St. Verena's quarter had offered a warning across 3 centuries. And perhaps, just perhaps, modern Blackmere had listened. What none of the residents knew was that one final discovery still waited beneath the city, not in the underground complex, not in the archive, not in the forgotten district, but in the deepest section of the original drainage tunnels, a place investigators had avoided for months due to structural dangers. Engineers had finally developed a safe route. Exploration would begin within days. Most scholars expected little, perhaps additional artifacts, perhaps more records. Nothing extraordinary. They were wrong, because hidden beneath the filth that had inspired the entire investigation lay evidence connecting Blackmere's past to an even older mystery, a mystery that began long before St. Verena's quarter existed, long before the city itself existed, and once uncovered, it would force everyone to reconsider the true origins of the dirtiest city in the kingdom, a mystery that began long before St. Verena's quarter existed, long before the city itself existed, and once uncovered, it would force everyone to reconsider the true origins of the dirtiest city in the kingdom. The engineers spent nearly 2 weeks preparing the route. The deepest drainage tunnels had become infamous among excavation teams. Many passages remained unstable. Floodwater had weakened foundations. Ancient collapses blocked entire sections. Several surveyors argued that the risk outweighed any potential reward. Others disagreed. After everything Blackmere had learned over the past year, abandoning the final unexplored region felt impossible. Curiosity had carried the city this far. Curiosity would carry it a little farther. Thomas heard about the expedition while unloading oak barrels near the southern market. By now, discoveries beneath the city had become part of everyday conversation. Children discussed tunnels. Merchants debated historical theories. Priests referenced St. Verena's quarter during sermons. The hidden city below Blackmere had become almost as famous as the city above it. Yet something about this final expedition felt different, perhaps because it represented an ending. For months, the people of Blackmere had lived with questions. Now they stood close to answers. The exploration began on a cool summer morning. A small team descended into the original tunnel network. Unlike previous excavations, this mission focused entirely on observation. No major digging, no large work crews, just careful exploration. The tunnels twisted beneath Blackmere like roots beneath an ancient tree. Some sections remained recognizable. Others appeared almost natural, as though water had carved them long before human builders arrived. Hours passed. The explorers advanced slowly. They documented every turn, every chamber, every structural detail. Then, deep beneath the western quarter, they noticed something unusual. The tunnel walls changed. Again, not merely in age or construction style. In material, the stone itself looked different. Older, much older. The blocks did not resemble medieval masonry, nor did they resemble anything found within St. Verena's quarter. These stones belonged to another era entirely. The discovery immediately captured scholarly attention. When the first reports reached the surface, excitement spread quickly. Could the tunnels be older than Blackmere? Could they predate the settlement? Some historians had suggested that possibility before. Now evidence seemed to support it. The expedition continued. Soon the explorers reached a chamber unlike any previously discovered. The room was small, circular, perfectly symmetrical. Its walls displayed worn carvings, almost erased by time. Most details proved impossible to interpret. Centuries of moisture had damaged them, yet several symbols remained visible. Strange geometric designs, flowing lines, patterns resembling rivers. The explorers carefully copied everything. When the sketches reached scholars above ground, debate erupted immediately. No one agreed on a single explanation. Some believed the chamber served a ceremonial purpose. Others suggested it functioned as a water management structure. A few argued it belonged to an unknown settlement that existed before Blackmere. Whatever the truth, one fact became increasingly difficult to deny. The city's history stretched deeper than anyone imagined. For generations, residents believed Blackmere began with its medieval founders. Now that certainty seemed fragile. The chamber contained another surprise. Hidden beneath centuries of sediment, investigators found fragments of pottery. Simple pieces, nothing glamorous, yet analysis revealed extraordinary age. Far older than St. Verena's quarter, far older than the oldest known city records. The implications stunned everyone. Human beings had occupied the area long before Blackmere existed. The city had not appeared from nothing. It had grown atop forgotten foundations, then upon other foundations, then upon still older layers. Civilizations built upon civilizations. Generations built upon generations. The realization fascinated Thomas. It fascinated nearly everyone, because the story was no longer only about dirt, or disease, or tunnels. It was about time itself, about how places accumulate history, how cities become collections of countless lives layered atop one another. Every street in Blackmere suddenly felt different. Every building, every stone. Residents began imagining who had walked those same paths centuries earlier, who had lived there, worked there, dreamed there. The city felt larger than before, not physically, historically, emotionally. Weeks later, scholars completed their preliminary conclusions. A public presentation was organized in Weaver Square. Hundreds attended. Thomas attended with Eleanor and Margaret. Father Benedict stood alongside historians and council officials. Together, they presented the findings. The oldest underground structures appeared to belong to an ancient settlement predating Blackmere by several centuries, perhaps more. No complete records survived. No names remained. Only fragments. Yet the evidence suggested continuous occupation of the site across generations. People kept returning, building, expanding, rebuilding. The location offered advantages: water access, trade routes, defensible terrain. Human beings recognized opportunity long before they recorded it. The crowd listened attentively. Many expected dramatic revelations, hidden kings, lost treasures, ancient curses. Instead, they received something simpler and perhaps more meaningful. The city's true story was not one of a single founding. It was a story of continuity, of ordinary people adapting to challenges again and again, across centuries, different names, different rulers, different buildings, the same human struggles, the same human hopes. The scholars then turned to St. Verena's quarter, to the sickness, to the buried supplies, to the anonymous clerk Edwin Marr, and finally to the lessons preserved beneath the streets. The conclusions resonated deeply. The ancient disaster had not occurred because people lacked intelligence. It had not occurred because they lacked resources. It happened because fear gradually overwhelmed trust, because uncertainty encouraged division, because communities forgot how much they depended upon one another. The message felt especially powerful after everything Blackmere had endured. The city had come dangerously close to repeating those mistakes, yet it had also avoided them. Not perfectly, not without suffering, but successfully enough to survive. After the presentation ended, residents remained in the square long after sunset. Groups discussed the findings. Families shared stories. Older citizens reflected on the difficult year. Younger citizens listened. Something important was happening. The city was processing its experience, turning hardship into memory, turning memory into understanding. Over the following months, recovery accelerated. Trade returned almost completely. Construction projects resumed. Damaged districts improved. The cemetery expansion ceased. Funeral bells grew less frequent. Life reclaimed its ordinary rhythm. Even Rat Alley seemed transformed. The lane remained crooked. The houses still leaned precariously. The smells never disappeared entirely. Blackmere remained Blackmere, yet people viewed it differently. They understood it better, and understanding changes places. One autumn evening, nearly 2 years after the storm that exposed the first tunnel, Thomas climbed a hill overlooking the city. Margaret accompanied him. She was old enough now to ask thoughtful questions. As they watched the setting sun paint rooftops gold, she pointed toward the distant church towers. "Is the city still dirty?" she asked. Thomas laughed softly. The question felt appropriate. After everything that had happened, perhaps it was the most important question of all. He looked across Blackmere. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Market stalls closed for the evening. Church bells echoed faintly through the air. The city remained imperfect. Always would. every city was. People created messes, made mistakes, faced challenges. That part never changed. No, Thomas finally said. Then he smiled. Well, yes. Margaret frowned in confusion. Thomas chuckled. The streets get dirty. The markets get dirty. The city gets dirty. He paused. But that isn't what matters. The child waited. What matters is whether people help clean it. Margaret considered the answer seriously. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied. The sun continued sinking below the horizon. Darkness slowly spread across the kingdom. Yet unlike the darkness that accompanied the storm years earlier, this one felt peaceful. The city below glowed with lantern light, warm, alive, enduring. Beneath those streets rested forgotten tunnels, buried chambers, ancient records, the remains of St. Verena's quarter, generations of history hidden beneath layers of earth and stone. The discoveries would occupy scholars for decades, perhaps centuries. New questions would emerge. New mysteries would appear. History never truly ends. It simply waits for someone curious enough to uncover it. And as night settled over Blackmere, the people of the city carried forward the most valuable thing recovered from beneath their streets. Not treasure, not artifacts, not ancient documents. A lesson, one written by countless ordinary lives across countless generations. A lesson reminding them that cities are not built from stone alone. They are built from trust. And when that trust survives, even the dirtiest city can endure. If you want to continue the journey, the next video is waiting.